If you have your Bibles with you, please, let's open to Psalm 23. We're just going to read a little. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He makes you. You wouldn't think you'd have to make a sheep lie down in green pastures. But he makes us because we don't always know what's good for us. And always the grass seems greener on the other side. But he makes us lay down in green pastures. And he leads me beside quiet waters. You know, sheep can't feed in rushing waters. Sorry, can't drink from rushing waters. They have to have still, quiet waters, otherwise they can't drink. So just keep that in mind and come with me into the New Testament, into the book of Romans. Romans chapter 8, I think Janet read from Romans 8 this morning, and so it's good to know that I'm on track. And we're going to read from verse 22. We know that the whole creation has been groaning, as in the pains of childbirth, right up to the present time. Now, what a word for us today. That we are in a world that undoubtedly is groaning. That is, it's almost as though the entire universe is in the pains of childbirth. That's how much groaning is taking place all around us. Not only so, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. Wait a minute. I thought that we were already adopted as sons. Aren't we already adopted as sons? Aren't we already... well, why are we waiting to be adopted as sons if we're already adopted as sons and daughters? Well, let me put it to you like this. When you gave your lives to Jesus, you were saved. But through a thing that we call sanctification, we are being saved. Okay? Because salvation is being worked out in our lives. And then, when the resurrection takes place, the second resurrection, then we will be saved. And so we are being, and we will be. There'll be a time when our bodies, those factors that seem so against us as we grow older, that part of us that was so much for us when we were younger, that seems to work against us as we grow older. That we are waiting the adoption of sons, when our very bodies will reflect the thing that took place on the day that we were born again, the very thing that took place when Jesus rose from the grave. We will reflect that, for we are the image of God. Yes. So, you with me? Hello. Thank you. For in this hope we are saved. But hope that is seen, is no hope at all. Who hopes for what he already has? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. Wow. Now, this is fascinating because previously in verse 23 it says, we wait eagerly. And then it says, we wait patiently. So that's two kinds of waiting. That we have to wait eagerly, because if we do not have the motivation within us to be eager for what God promises us, then we will miss out on all of the things that God has in store for us, because we will not have the interest, we won't have the focus, we won't have the direction, we won't give it the attention, the necessary action won't take place within us to be able to move us from where we were to where we need to be in order to be able to get to where we need to go. And so we wait eagerly, but at the same time, we have to wait patiently. We wait eagerly because we want to hasten the day, but we need to wait patiently because God has your times in His hands. We wait eagerly because we're hungry and we're desirous and we've tasted the first fruits, but we want more. But we need to wait patiently because God don't like grumbling waiters. You just look at Israel, who extended the duration of their wandering in the wilderness with their mouths by complaining. So we need to watch our complaining. Well, we've got a Bible student over here who has figured out that it's only 13 days to get from where they began to where they were told to go. And it took them 40 years to take a 13-day trip. How many of you are taking 40 years to take a 13-day trip? Oh, I haven't finished yet. Forgive me. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weaknesses. In the same way that we have to wait patiently, in the same way the Spirit is patient with us. Yes. In the same way the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We don't know what we ought to pray for. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our humanity. He helps us in our frailty. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our stupidity. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our ignorance because we don't even know what to pray for. But the Spirit Himself intercedes for us with groans that words cannot express. And He who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints in accordance with God's will. The Spirit Himself intercedes with wordless groans. The abundant life, everybody, begins with a groan. Yes, the abundant life begins with a groan. Our passage today began with a wee. With a wee. Our passage began with a wee, because you're not in this by yourself. Yes, you're not in this by yourself. You might feel isolated, but you're not in this by yourself. It looked like Peter was isolated when he was in prison, but there were a whole group of people praying for him, interceding for him, and their intercession, their prayers, got a hold of an angel. And that angel entered into Peter's prison at a time when it looked like he was all alone, at a time when it felt like he was all alone. The intercession got a hold of an angel and took him into the prison and set Peter free. Peter felt so alone that when he was being set free, he thought he was having some kind of dream. And it was only when he knocked on the door of the house of the praying people, of the people who were praying, it was only when he knocked on that door that he realized that he was never alone. Yes. You are not in this by yourself. It's not as though God doesn't hear us by ourselves, because God heard Sarah when she laughed within herself. So even with our lips closed, God can hear us. He can hear our thoughts and he can hear our groans. Yeah. He knows your thoughts are far off. And so we can sit in utter silence and utter things in our spirit, because God can hear your thoughts and your deeper things. Yes. Nevertheless, the Bible encourages us to be audible, because it has a lot to say about that. It encourages us to speak and to declare, because God speaks and God declares. God says, you shall have whatsoever you say. Yes. Encouraging you to say something. You shall have whatever you say. I've got a little testimony here today. My little testimony is this: the pigeons have flown the coop. They didn't go when I was ranting and raving like a madman trying to chase them away, but when I spoke to them and told them that it was time for them to move on. Within a week, all my pigeons have flown away. Yes. God says, speak to the mountain, and it shall be moved. He said, Ezekiel, speak to the bones, and they shall live. Yes. So people who will not speak out get left out. This is true in all of your daily existence. If you don't say something, if you're not saying what you want and what you desire, you will suffer in silence, because God wants you to speak. And if you want to change the world in which you live, whether it is at home or whether it is at work or the environment in which we habit, if we remain silent, then we will suffer, because nothing is changed unless we say something. Yes. So speech is important for creation's sake. Speech creates things. Speech creates your world, just like the Word created the world back in the beginning. Yes. Through the vehicle of speech, God formed and framed our world. But what does creation do when it doesn't have a vehicle wherewith creation can speak words? It took words to make creation, but what is creation meant to do when creation doesn't have a voice to be able to speak? Let me tell you what creation does. It groans. Yes, it groans. It groans. And it's one thing for us to be able to say today that creation groans, because we can see the effects of what has taken place since the Industrial Revolution. We can see the changes that have happened all around us because of how we have mismanaged our education and our knowledge and all of the things, all of our growth that has been in many ways such a great blessing. Nevertheless, we can see the effects of that upon creation, and so when we look at creation now, it is quite clear to us that there is a groan taking place all around the world. But back when Paul said this 2,000 years ago, back then, you had to have ears to hear the groaning of creation. Nevertheless, if you've got ears that can hear, you can hear that groan of creation that has been taking place ever since the fall. Yes. So creation groans. Sometimes we get brought to the place where we have got nothing more than a groan, where we can't articulate what we're going through. Pain will do that to a person. Pain will shut a person up and leave you with just a groan. Yes. Now, the passage talks about intercession because prayer begins with a groan. The prayer of intercession is not so much something that you can utter as something that you feel. It is something that is felt deep, too deep for words, that finally and eventually may bring itself to the place where it can be formed upon the lips of your mouth. Nevertheless, it begins with something that you feel deep down inside. And prayer, even if it's just a groan, is communication. And communication implies relationship, and that's why the passage begins with a we. Yes, because communication implies relationship, and in any relationship there must be communication. You must speak, or there will be no communication, and where there is no communication, there will be an end to the relationship. That's why the last thing that you want, men, is for your wife to say nothing. Yes. Because if that gets extended so that the silence becomes normality, where there is no communication, there is no relationship. Hello. I said hello. Thank you. Yes. Yes. It's important that we begin also to learn how to speak the same language. You notice here that there is an alignment of the language between what creation is going through and what we are going through and what the Spirit is going through. So that there is a three-way alignment here, that the earth is groaning and that the children of God or the sons of God are groaning, and also the Spirit is groaning. It's important that we come into some kind of agreement because relationship requires agreement. Relationship requires an agreement. You must talk until you come to the place where you agree, where you're on the same page, where you are aligned. If one can chase 1,000 and two can chase 10,000, that is talking about the exponential increase of the power of your words and the power of your life that comes through relationship. You would think that it would be if one can chase 1,000, then two ought to be able to deal with 2,000, but no, the increase is exponential. That's talking about the fact that we are not meant to be independent. That we are not meant to be isolated. That we're not meant to be doing things on our own. It's through agreement that we can walk together. But how can two walk together unless they be agreed? And how will we find agreement if we don't speak to each other? That's why perhaps the most important part of our service in church happens before and after, when everybody is talking to one another. Perhaps the most important aspect of our church doesn't occur on a Sunday morning. Perhaps it's what happens during the week when you get together. Perhaps this is why we believe in our church that friendship is more important than function, that it's more important that we are connected together relationally than what it is that we do personally, actively within the church. I'm not saying that you should have one without the other. I think that the two go together. But what I'm saying is that without the friendship, without the relationship, without our connection, without our being grafted in to the same identity and the same capacity, into the same spirit, if you would, without us being drawn together in agreement, then we're missing out on 9,000 power potential within our lives. Agreement means collaboration. It's through collaboration that we are fruitful. Fruit stops when we're isolated. Fruit stops when we're isolated. When we detach, you can't be fruitful unless you abide in the vine. When we're isolated, fruit stops. And so, if you isolate yourself, then you don't need to be worried, really, about some demon coming and attacking you. Because the isolated person will set about destroying themselves through their isolation. The isolated person will start to digest their own internal organs through the increase of acidity, through the increase of worry, through the increase of being so detached from a source of life that is necessity for us as human beings, that we will find ourselves not needing any demon to destroy us, because we will destroy ourselves. Yes. And yet the natural tendency when we're wounded is to wade into the abyss of isolation. We need each other. Connectivity comes through the spirit of intercession. Hello. Our connection comes, the thing that connects us is actually that intercessory factor of the Spirit of God that draws us to each other, that He is in operation drawing us to each other. And you will find, if you isolate yourself for long enough, that you will end up with this internal groan, and that groan that you are sensing is the groan where you need to be with others who will agree in the Spirit with what God is wanting to do in your life. We need each other. That's why when Elisha was by himself in the cave, when Elijah was by himself in the cave, and he was getting himself into a bad headspace, that he needed Elisha to draw him out, for him to be able to partner with, to be able to bring about progression of his ministry. That's why Naomi changed her name to Mara in her depression. But by getting together with Ruth, she was able to find purpose again for her life. That's why Paul, when he was in prison at the midnight hour, had Silas with him to be able to bring about the miracle and get them set free, because we need each other. And so if I were the enemy, if I were the devil, then I wouldn't so much try to destabilize your relationship with God as I would try to destabilize your relationship with somebody else, with people, with others. And if you think about it, most of us don't have problems with God. Most of us don't have issues with God. We understand that God is God. Most of us live our lives with this idea: God isn't the one who gives me my problems, it's the people of God that I struggle with. If you think about it. And so what happens is that the enemy, because of the power of agreement, the thing that can take place through our agreeing and being on the same page and being united and one with each other, the power of that to be able to bring about change in the world around us, to be able to lift us up into higher levels and greater places and greater states of being than what we've ever known before, so that one is able to put to flight 1,000, but two of us can put to flight 10,000. If you could just get somebody to agree with you, just get somebody, just one person, just get one person to agree, just get one person to agree with you in the Spirit. Just one. Then you have increased your power to 10,000%. 10,000%. And God says, if any two of you will agree, then it shall be done for you. And so if the enemy is to do anything, he will try to send a spirit of disagreement and have you disagreeing over all kinds of things that don't really amount to a tin of beans. Happens in church, happens in marriages, happens in families, happens in communities, happens in cities and states, to send a spirit of disagreement, because if you two could just get it together, you shall have whatever you say. Whatever you ask for, if you could just connect, if you could just agree, just agree. And I'm not talking about agreeing to disagreeing. What a load of baloney that is. That just buries things and has them festering, creating wedges between us. It's not agreeing to disagree. It is finding out those things that are so essential that you will not be unwilling, so that you will be unwilling to disagree on these points that are so important, so powerful for us, the things that God uses to get us together, to bring us together, to have us together as one, so that we can then start to see what we read in the Word actually take place within our lives. The miracles that we read in the Word, why aren't they happening? Well, if you could just stop being so independent in your view, so isolated in your perspectives, and agree. Woo! Woo! Yes, and so Paul is urging us in the midst of a groaning and travailing environment. And if you don't think that the world in which we live is groaning and travailing, all you got to do is switch on the news. And you will there have a whole list of bad news. Just bad news. It's all there, being laid out. And the reason why they give us so much bad news is because bad news sells. If they were to put up good news, well, nobody would pay to watch that. And we might not enjoy the bad news, but you're still watching. You're still looking at your media tablets and still finding out whatever you can find out about all the terrible things that are taking place in the world. Yes, the whole creation groans and travails in pain to this present moment. The whole world is groaning so much that even we are groaning within. Yes, even we who have the first fruits of the Spirit. So what that means is that you can be touched by God, filled with the Holy Ghost, have the joy of the Lord, be excited about the things in God, be exuberant, be so exuberant that you're running around church, waving flags and jumping out of your skin and praising God, and yet even we who have the first fruits still groan. Yes, that we can still groan because we ain't seen everything that we know God wants to do. And so we groan. And you've got to live in this tension of being a son of God and yet waiting for the adoption of your new created bodies. You've got to live in this tension of being excited and groaning, of loving and hating. Yes. And living with this groan. The groan within is the groaning of the soul. It's a groan within that doesn't even get to escape your lips. It's the groan within that has you pacing the floors at night. It's the groan that we feel when we can't find love. It's the groan that we feel when we don't feel safe. Sheep don't produce little lambs in disruption and chaos. They go to calm places. He leads me besides still waters. Yes, they can't even drink from a brook that's moving too fast, it's too turbulent, but they're still thirsty. Imagine that. There's water there, but it's too turbulent and too rushing too fast for me to be able to drink from it. Too much chaos going on there for me to be able to drink from it. And so my soul yet is still thirsty. I'm still thirsty, but I can't drink. And because the soul is thirsty, it begins to break its own rules. And the thirsty soul will do things to bring about self-destructive processes within our lives. Because we're thirsty, but we're not able to drink. And because the soul is thirsty, you go to social media to find companionship. Because the soul is thirsty, you drink yourself to sleep. Because the soul is thirsty, you medicate yourself to find a false sense of calm. Because the soul is thirsty, you'll go to a psychiatrist just to get a nap. Because the soul is thirsty, you groan within yourself. Yes. Some people have been groaning so long their spirits have got laryngitis. We've groaned ourselves to the place where we're without words. Just like Hannah. Praying, oh God, give me children lest I die. The groaning that was taking place within her brought her to the place where she no longer had any words. But her mouth is still moving, and Eli looks over and sees her there, thinks that she's drunk and goes over to rebuke her. And she says, I'm not drunk. I'm just groaning. I'm just wanting a child. She got one person to agree with her. And 12 months later, she gave birth to a son. Not just any son, but Samuel, one of the greatest prophets that this earth has ever seen. Because she got someone to agree with her. So the groaning within is groaning to try to get us to be connected to the place where God can do something. Yes. Your soul is groaning within itself, and you try to avoid it, but avoidance doesn't negate the fact that there is groaning within the crevices of your soul. Groaning that you try to anesthetize with all kinds of things, that you try to keep yourself busy so that you don't have to pay attention to the groaning that is taking place. I groan within myself because I can't find myself. I don't know my identity. Some of us groan because we're confused about our sexual identity, and so we groan within ourselves. Some of us groan because we've got no peace at home, and so we groan. And we groan because we thought we'd be further on by now, and so we groan. And we groan because I didn't think it would be this hard, and I groan because I thought I'd have a house by now, and I groan because I'm being evicted, and I groan because I'm in pain. I'm groan because people don't understand me. I groan because I can't talk about the things that I'm going through, because people wouldn't understand me. I groan because what I'm going through is so painful that I can't even talk to anybody about what I'm going through. That's why I groan. I groan because there's things going on in my life that I'm trying to give up, and I don't know how to give them up, and so I just groan. I groan because she walked out on me. I groan because he left me. I groan because my secrets are now sleeping with some other person. I groan because of all of the hopes that I had when I was younger that I never saw fulfilled. They were almost there. I was almost there. Almost had them. And they slipped through my fingers, and so I groan. I groan because my kids are hurting. I groan because my parents are hurting. I groan because I'm getting older. I groan because you've rejected me. I groan because you gossiped about me. I groan. I groan. I groan. I groan. I groan. And I groan because I feel frustrated, and I groan because it's hurting, and I groan because I don't trust you. Hey, yes, some of you groan because you don't trust, and you don't know who to trust. Some of you groan because you've had pastors that have done the wrong thing by you, or done the wrong thing by your family, and so you no longer trust. Yes. Who am I talking to? Okay. And you groan, and you want to trust. It's not that you don't want to trust, it's just that you have been abused, and now you can't trust, and all you do is groan. I groan because it hurts to wait, and I've been waiting such a long time. I've been waiting such a long time. I've been waiting such a long time. Waiting for a breakthrough, waiting for it to end. We read, we're waiting for redemption. We're waiting for redemption. That word redemption is a fiscal term. It means I'm waiting for there to be a return, some kind of return for everything that I've invested in, for everything that I've put in my life. All of the praying and all of the giving and all of the doing and all of the going and all of the things that I've been involved in with my family, with my church, with my workplace. I'm waiting for some kind of redemption. Yes. And then Paul finishes up by saying something incredibly profound. He says, we know not. Now, if you were to ask me a question and I were to come back to you and say, I don't know, you wouldn't be too surprised, because after all, who am I with my education? Pastors so often come under so much pressure because they feel like they have to have the answers, and most of us really are not that smart at all. I mean, look how dumb we are. Look how dumb we are. We're leading a church, that is a thankless position in most situations. Yes. Nevertheless, if you were to ask me or your average person, what's the answer to this question, and they were to say, I don't know, you wouldn't be that surprised. They would say, Google it. Yes, yes. And you wouldn't be surprised. You would think, oh, why didn't I think about Googling it? Yes. But here we're dealing with Paul. We're dealing with Paul, one of the most intellectual men of his day, one of the smartest, cleverest, knew several languages so that no matter where he went, whatever country he went to, he could speak their language. Top of his class. Wrote most of the New Testament in the most correct Greek that any of the New Testament is written in. If you were to read the Gospel of Mark, you'd be reading from the Greek literature that was written by some Greek who owned a fish and chip shop. But if you were to read anything that Paul writes, or Luke as well, Dr. Luke, of course, but anything that Paul writes, the genius of it all, the absolute genius that he could speak to kings, and they would be speaking on the same level. And when somebody like Paul, who saw Jesus, who had miracles, who raised people from the dead, and you have someone like Paul stepping up and saying, we know not. My, something's going on there. Something is going on there. I've had parents whose children have committed suicide ask me why. When you have something like that, and they want an answer. I've had parents who have lost their baby, and they want to know why. I've had young people ask me what they should do with their lives, as if I would have the answer. And I'm meant to have the answer, because I'm God's oracle, or something like that. And inside I'm thinking, well, when I was your age, I was making my own decisions and making my own mistakes, and you've actually reached an age where you can make mistakes and it's okay. That's how you learn and that's how you grow. Yes, and so I'm very hesitant to give people advice. I'm very hesitant to give anybody any advice except to seek the Lord, that God knows and He will guide you. Marriages falling apart. Husbands that have betrayed their wives and are fooling around and they're afraid to be together, but she's afraid to be apart. Yeah. And they want to know, what should I do? Yeah. So quite often I don't know, but when Paul says, I don't know, what we have here is really the secret to the whole text. And the very thing that God is trying to get us to. Because ever since the beginning of time, excuse me, let's see if I can bend over without making that noise. Ever since the beginning of time, the Spirit has hovered over creation, has hovered over the world. And in a very real way, this world has always been the Spirit's world. Yeah. And the Spirit is constantly seeking a way in which He can break into the world in which we live. To find a way to break into your life, and to break into your family, and to break into our community, and to break into your soul and answer the groaning that is taking place within you. He is constantly trying to get a door opened into the world. Yes. Constantly knocking, trying to try the lock and to see if something will open. And here when you have a man like Paul saying, "We know not," what you have is humility in operation. You have a man who is an intellectual genius admitting that he doesn't know it all. Yeah, that he doesn't know it all. Because if you are not willing to admit that you don't know it all, then you suffer the propensity towards worshiping at the shrine of your own ego. Yes. And so you have got to be willing to say, "I know not." If you can find within yourself the space that needs filling, God will fill it. God will fill it. And what humility does is it opens within ourselves the recognition that we don't have it all, that we don't have everything that we need, that we haven't arrived, that we haven't got there yet. So much of our Western world feels as though it's got everything that we need. If we could only be humble and say we don't, then God could fill the empty space, could fill your vacancy. If you could just admit to the fact that there is so much of your life that needs the answer that it doesn't have. So much within your life that requires a move of God, the dimension of God. To the place where you don't even know what you should be praying for, but you just come to God and say, "All I've got, God, is this groan. And I don't even know what I need to pray for, but oh God, oh God, oh God." And you see what is happening is the Spirit of God is also groaning. Yes. And so creation is groaning because it needs us to be groaning and us to come into agreement with one another and with the Spirit of God, so that there is a conflagration of the groaning and the uttering and the yearning. And we don't know everything that it is that we need and everything that it is that we want, but the Spirit knows. And eye hasn't seen and ear hasn't heard, and neither has it entered into the imagination of man what God has in store for those that love Him. But the Spirit knows, because the Spirit searches the deep things of God. And the Spirit reveals those deep things to us. And so we come before Him with a yearning, with a groaning, with a desire, deep, deep desire. Deep, deep desire. Yes. Yes. Where is that joy? It's deep down in my soul. Where is that strength? It's deep down in your soul. If you haven't got it bubbling through you, dig a little deeper. Dig a little deeper. There are artesian wells of the Spirit that He has for you. Just dig a little deeper. Dig a little deeper. Bo, could you come back, please? And we'll have a little more worship here right now. But just let your heart, be hungry for God and find yourself in the place where God will come in. Yes, where God will do what He does, because you can't do anything more about your situation. Amen.